Hey everyone, I want to talk to you a little bit about cost volume profit. And this is one that winds up being very mathematically oriented. People get kind of confused about it. And I want to talk a little bit about the formulas that you usually see in a cost volume profit chapter. They give you the formula method on how to figure out break even. And they also have if you want to have a target income. And this is the thing that I used to just get really annoyed because I think, oh gee, I had to memorize another formula. Good gosh. So I decided I really need to beat this thing. I need to figure out what's going on. They do actually talk about this in the form of a income statement, the CVP income statement, or contribution margin income statement as it's more commonly called. So let's start with that, shall we? So the contribution margin income statement is not like a regular income statement. You have sales, but instead of cost of goods sold, you have variable cost. And I'm going to abbreviate here. And then you subtract variable cost to come up with a contribution margin. Contribution margin. And then after that you subtract fixed cost. To arrive at net income. Or I'm going to say net operating income because we haven't gotten to tax and other revenues and expenses, so I'm going to call it net operating income. Alright. Also sometimes sometimes called EBIT, earnings before income, tax, and interest. Okay. Alrighty, good. So this is our income statement. Now I'm going to come up with a few things. Now, when you talk about CVP, it's usually a good idea to break things down into a per unit amount, per unit dollar amount. So what is it going to be for sales for 1 unit? What's it going to be for cost for 1 unit? Okay, and that's going to apply on the top half of my income statement. So I'm going to choose a dollar amount, and this is going to be $500 per unit for sales. So I'm going to sell something and it sells for $500. And the cost of that unit, the variable cost for that unit is $300 to arrive at a contribution margin of $200. Okay? So the contribution margin just means basically how much do I have to contribute from the sale of a unit in order to cover my fixed cost in order to make a net operating income. Okay? Now, if I break even, I'm just going to put an equals there. If I break even, then that means that whatever my total contribution margin is and my fixed cost is going to be the same. They'll be the same dollar amount. Alright, so I'm going to throw in a fixed cost amount, and I'm just going to pick a number. We'll say 200,000. Yeah, sounds like a good round number. 200,000 is going to be my fixed cost. Now, I'm going to do fixed cost in total because, for the most part, people should look at fixed cost in total because that doesn't change. This does. This changes as you sell more items. Then your total sales goes up, your total variable cost goes up, and consequently your total contribution margin goes up. But this remains basically the same. Okay, and thus the name fixed cost. It remains fixed. Alright, now let's get to this one. We're going to talk about break-even point in terms of units. Alright, so let's take a look. It says here, fixed cost divided by the contribution margin per unit. Well, you have the contribution margin per unit, and you have the fixed cost, $200,000. Now calculating this, all I had to do is take the fixed cost divided by my contribution margin per unit, right? Okay, so get out our handy calculator, because no one will believe me if it comes out to be this certain number, 200,000 divided by 200, and it gives me 1,000 units. Okay, so 1,000 units is going to be how many I have to sell in order to make no profit. In other words, to break even. All right. So if I take the 1,000 and multiply it by all of these three items above, then I come up with 500,000, 300,000, and 200,000. So 500,000 for sales, 300,000 for variable costs, 200,000 for my contribution margin. Oh, and look, my fixed cost is 200,000. So I just slide that over here, and that means my net operating income is going to be 0, which is break even. So that is when my sales is the same as my cost, which is 300,000 and 200,000. That's break even. And I figured that out by taking this formula. Now, you're thinking, oh gee, I gotta memorize this. Well, not really, okay? Because I hate to memorize stuff, because I tell you what, I walk out of a room after learning something and trying to stuff it in my head, and as soon as I walk out the door I forget it. So I really can't stand having to memorize stuff. I'd like to know why it works the way it works. So let's back into this a different way. Let's look at this. I have a net operating income of 0, and I have fixed costs of $200,000. Now, what does contribution margin have to be in order to get net operating income of 0? Well, if you use simple math, 0 plus 200,000 is going to be 200,000. Okay? Do you believe me? Well, let's look at this. We learned this back in first grade. 1 plus 2 equals 3. Now, of course, I'm using simple numbers. I'm not trying to insult your intelligence, okay? But 1 plus 2 is equal to 3. If you turn this around and went back up, then it would be true to say that 3 minus 2 equals 1. So here's the 3 minus 2 equals 1. That's this right here, okay? So 200 minus 200 equals 0, okay? 3 minus 2 is 1. If I go the opposite direction and go 3 plus 2, or 1 plus 2 is equal to 3, I'll go 1 plus 2 is equal to 3. Well, 0 plus 200 is equal to 200,000. Yeah, I mean, there it is, right there, in red and white, okay? So this is the reflective type of property. So all I have to do is, if I know what 0 is going to be, all I have to do is then add fixed cost to that, and my contribution margin is going to be 200,000. Okay? Is that simple enough? Good. Now let's try something else. This is going to blow your mind. This is exactly the same as this. Check it out. Dollar sales for Target. Oops, I'm sorry, not dollar sales. Where'd it go? Ah, there it is. There it is. Okay, never mind. Here we go. Unit sales at a target income, break-even point in units. Okay, different terminology, but guess what, folks? They are exactly the same thing. Let's look. We got fixed costs in the numerator. We have contribution margin per unit. The only thing that's different is they throw in target income in the numerator over here on the right. So I'm going to try something here, and this is going to be great. We're going to have a great time with this. I'm going to say that I want a target profit of $10,000. Okay, so my net operating income is going to be $10,000, and everything else remains the same as far as, you know, dollar per unit and stuff like that. Now my fixed cost is going to wind up being $200,000. Okay, so that doesn't change. All I'm doing is saying I want to generate more sales to get net operating income of $10,000. Well, what's going to be my contribution margin? Well, if you follow this logic right here that I just outlined here, 200 plus 10 is going to be 210,000, right? So 210,000 is my contribution margin. Now, if I go back over here and I take the 200,000 and divide that by 200 per unit, does that give me 1,000 units for break even? Oh, wait a minute. Let's think about that for a second. This is $200 per unit for my contribution margin, okay? And I want to know how much I would have to get to break even for my contribution margin over here, because I know if I go upwards and add, I get 200,000. So my question to you is, how many units at $200 each do I have to do, or do I have to sell, in order to make a contribution margin of 200,000? How many units at 200 do I have to sell for a contribution margin of 200 do I have to sell to make $200,000 total contribution margin? And of course the answer is simple. You take that, divide by that, and you get 1,000. So wouldn't it be also logical to take the 210,000 and divide that by 200 per unit to figure out how many units I need to sell in order to make a profit of 10,000. So get out the trusty calculator, 210,000 divide by $200 per unit, and that gives me 1,050. So now I've got to sell 1,050 units in order to make a profit of 10,000. Wow, did I just blow your minds? Yeah, isn't it mind-blowing how simple this is? And the problem is, when people write textbooks, and I'm not trying to cut down the people who write the textbooks, they're very intelligent people, you know, but they had to quantify it somehow, so they use fixed costs because that's an easy number to pull. But then they wind up mixing it up even more when they bring in this, and then they have to redo another formula, and the student looking at this thinks that they've got to remember 4 different formulas, one for unit sales, another for dollar sales, for both break even and target profit. It's like, oh my gosh, and I used to think this too when I was your age, when I was going through accounting classes, and I thought, Jiminy Christmas, I gotta learn all these memorize all these formulas. But I'll tell you what, if you follow the premise that really is concentrated on contribution margin, not fixed cost, not like it is here, okay? All you have to do is think contribution margin. That's where the action is, right here. And so if you take the contribution margin, divide by the contribution margin per unit, you know how many units you need to sell to make break even. If you take the contribution margin here and divide by the contribution margin per unit, you know how many units you need to sell at $200 contribution margin to make that contribution margin in order to get a profit of $10,000. It's so simple, it's mind-blowing. Okay, it's so simple, it's mind-blowing. That concludes the first part of this.